In this video, we're going to look at a few different types of questions that represent multiplication that students will be able to practice using the materials in my Dropbox. The first type are just what I call straight multiplication questions, so 7 times 4 or 3 times 8. So the 7 times 4 is 28 and 3 times 8 is 24. If you haven't already done so, please take a few minutes and watch my video that focuses on these types of questions and the patterns behind them and the skills that students should be practicing. The next type of question are area questions. So students should recognize that multiplication represents the area of a rectangle. We've worked with this with linking cubes and building rectangles, but essentially, if we take the first rectangle here with dimensions of 4 and 7, you could divide the rectangle in one direction into 4 and in the other direction into 7. And then by counting all of the little squares, you'll find the area of the rectangle. Multiplication is a much more efficient way of finding the area of rectangles, especially given the large numbers that students will have to work with in grade 5. So when students are asked to find the area of a rectangle, what they need to do is find the product of its dimensions. So the dimensions here are 4 and 7, so the answer would be 28 centimeter squared. In the second example, students will do the exact same thing, but the dimensions are different. In this case, the dimensions are 6 and 8 for an area of 48 centimeters squared. It's very important for students to be able to visualize multiplication and division on number lines. This is something that's newer to the students, although they're used to using number lines for addition and subtraction. So the few steps that we've practiced in class when working with number lines, step number 1 would be to count the number of spaces on the number line. So in my first example, there are 4 spaces. And then we want to find the value of each space. And we do that by finding the difference between the two numbers. So in this case, 3 minus 0 is 3. And then it becomes a multiplication question. So the value of each space is 3. There are 4 spaces total. So the number that goes on the line is 12. What we want to avoid are students having to put numbers on each of the lines or on each of the benchmark. This represents an addition, not a multiplication. And in this case, we're really practicing our multiplication skills. So in the second example, if I count the number of spaces again, I have 4 in the first half of the number line. So there will be 8 spaces total. And the value of each space, if I find the difference between 0 and 5, is 5. So to find the number here, I would multiply the value of each space, which is 5, by the number of spaces that I'm working with, which is 8. And the product of 8 and 5 is 40. The last example that we'll look at for grade 5 is when working with algebra. And in this case, right now, students are only working with simplifying expressions. So if you look at the first example here, if a is equal to 7, what is the value of 4a? This is new in grade 5 for students, so it's completely acceptable for students to feel like they want to write out the multiplication sign, so 4 times a. Some students at this point are still thinking about it as a repeated addition, a plus a plus a plus a, but we really want to focus on our multiplication skills here. Although writing it like this is appropriate as students are learning and getting used to algebra, I always find it important to remind them that the multiplication sign because it looks like the variable x is typically not used in algebra. But in this case here, if a is equal to 7, then 4a is equal to 28. The second example is very similar, but there's an addition as a second step. So if z is equal to 4, 8z, or 8 times z, will be equal to 32. And then 32 plus 37 is 69. This is a good way for students to reinforce their multiplication skills, their algebraic skills, but also review their addition skills from earlier in the year. It's really, really important for them to continue practicing those skills as we move into multiplication and division. As usual, there are practice material available on my website. Thanks for watching.